She did not notice the man at first. That was the truth Sarah Bell would later return to again and again when people asked how it all began. The diner was loud in the way cheap places always were at the end of a long day, silverware clinking, a fryer popping angrily, the low drone of a sports radio crackling behind the counter. Sarah had learned how to move through that noise like water slipping between rocks. At 27, she had mastered the art of not being seen. She wiped counters, refilled mugs, smiled just enough to avoid complaints, and swallowed every insult like it was part of the uniform. On that Tuesday night, she was already running on fumes. Her back ached from a double shift, her phone buzzed with another reminder about her overdue rent, and her manager had spent the last hour snapping at her for things she hadn't done. So no, she didn't notice the elderly man when he first came in. She noticed him only after everyone else had decided he didn't matter. He sat alone in the last booth near the restroom, half hidden by a flickering fluorescent light that made his skin look gray. His coat was thin, frayed at the cuffs, damp from the cold rain outside. He didn't complain. He didn't wave her over. He just sat there, hands folded together, staring at the laminated menu like it was written in another language. Sarah caught sight of him when she passed by with a tray of plates. Something about the way he held himself, upright but tired, proud but defeated, made her slow down. She told herself she was just being polite. Still, she stopped. "Evening, sir," she said, forcing warmth into her voice. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" The man looked up slowly, as if lifting his gaze cost him effort. His eyes were sharp despite his age, a pale blue that didn't match the rest of him. "Just water," he said. "Tap is fine." Sarah nodded. She brought the water back, set it down gently, and turned to leave, but his hand lifted an inch off the table. Hesitant, apologetic. "Miss," he added quietly, "how much is the soup tonight?" $5.99, she said automatically. He exhaled a thin sound that barely qualified as a sigh. "I'll just have the water then." She walked back to the counter with a knot in her chest she couldn't quite explain. She had seen this before. People counting coins, people pretending not to be hungry, people choosing dignity over dinner. She poured herself a coffee she didn't need and stared at the order screen, pretending to review tickets. Her manager, Dale, leaned against the register, chewing gum loudly. "Table 7 still hasn't ordered," he said, nodding toward the old man. "If he's not buying, don't let him camp. We're not a shelter." Sarah didn't respond. She waited until Dale turned away, then grabbed a bowl and filled it with soup. She added crackers, a slice of bread, and without letting herself think too hard, slid a grilled cheese sandwich onto the plate. It was the special. It wasn't free. She carried it out before doubt could catch up with her. "Sir," she said softly, setting the tray down, "the cook made too much soup tonight. He'll toss it if no one eats it." The man stared at the food, then up at her, confusion flickering into something like disbelief. "I didn't order this." "It's okay," Sarah said, "on the house." For a moment she thought he might argue. Instead, his shoulders sagged and his eyes shone in a way that made her look away. "Thank you," he said. "You don't know what this means." She smiled small and quick and went back to work before emotion could trip her up. She didn't see Dale watching from the counter, his expression tightening. She didn't notice the man studying the diner between bites, his gaze lingering on the cracked tiles, the outdated menus, the staff rushing past without a glance. And she certainly didn't imagine that the simple act of placing that plate on the table was already rearranging the rest of her life. If you want the full truth, hit like so this story reaches more people. Half an hour later, she returned to clear the table. The bowl was empty, the sandwich gone. The man had folded his napkin neatly, just as her grandmother used to do. He pushed a few bills across the table, small ones worn thin. Sarah shook her head. "Don't worry about it," she said. "It's taken care of." The man studied her for a long moment. "No," he said quietly, "nothing in life is ever just taken care of. Someone always pays." Before she could respond, Dale appeared at her side. "Problem here?" he asked sharply. "No problem," the man said, meeting Dale's eyes without flinching. "Just finishing my meal." Dale glanced at the empty bowl, then at Sarah. "I'll handle this," he snapped. "Go." Sarah stepped back, heart pounding. She knew what was coming. Dale didn't wait until the man left. He didn't lower his voice. "You think you can just give food away?" he hissed. "You steal from me from this place." "I paid for it," she said. It was true. She had slipped a 10 into the register, money she needed, money she couldn't spare. Dale laughed without humor. "That's not how this works. Clock out, don't come back tomorrow." The words hit harder than she expected. Fired, just like that. She untied her apron with shaking hands. As she turned to leave, she felt eyes on her. The old man was standing now, leaning on the table for support. He watched her with something unreadable in his expression. Outside, the rain had started again. Sarah stood under the flickering neon sign, clutching her phone, trying to breathe. She didn't hear the door open behind her. "Miss," the man said. She turned. "You don't have to." He held out a small object pressed into her palm before she could refuse. It was a simple key, old brass, warm from his hand. "For your trouble," he said, "and your kindness." "I can't take this," she began. "You already have," he replied gently. "Tomorrow you'll understand." Then he smiled just once and walked into the rain. Sarah slept badly that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the weight of the key in her palm again, cold and solid and impossible to explain. She turned it over and over on the chipped nightstand beside her bed, watching the dull brass catch the light from a passing car. It didn't look special. No engraving, no fancy bow, just a single number stamped faintly into the metal. Still, it felt heavy with meaning, like something that had been waiting for her long before she ever touched it. She told herself it was nothing, a spare key to a storage unit, an old lockbox, a mistake, yet her chest stayed tight and sleep came in fragments. Morning arrived with no mercy. Her phone alarm buzzed, reminding her she no longer had anywhere to be, no shift to rush to, no uniform to pull on, just an overdue rent notice taped crookedly to her fridge and a voicemail from her landlord that she couldn't bring herself to open. Sarah sat at the edge of her bed, feet flat on the cold floor, and laughed once under her breath, fired for doing the right thing. That part felt painfully familiar. What didn't feel familiar was the sense that the story wasn't over yet. She picked up the key. "Tomorrow you'll understand," the man had said. Against her better judgment, she decided to find out. The diner wasn't far. She walked there, hands shoved deep into her jacket pockets, heart thudding harder with every step. When she pushed the door open, the bell chimed just like always. Same cracked tiles, same smell of grease and burnt coffee, but something was off. The place was quiet, too quiet. Dale wasn't behind the counter. Instead, two men in suits stood near the register, speaking in low voices. One of them noticed her immediately. "Can we help you?" he asked. I worked here," Sarah said. "I left something in my locker." The man's eyes flicked to the second suit, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Of course," the first man said. "Go ahead." Her locker was exactly how she'd left it. She took her jacket, her spare shoes, and hesitated before closing the door. That was when she noticed the old man sitting at her booth from the night before, clean now, shaved, dressed in a pressed coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He caught her eye and smiled like they were sharing a private joke. Her pulse spiked. He gestured for her to come over. "I was hoping you'd return," he said. "What's going on?" she asked. "Who are they?" He glanced toward the suits. "Accountants," he said simply, "and lawyers." The word lawyers landed like a dropped plate. "Why?" "Because," he said, folding his hands on the table, "this place belongs to me." Sarah laughed before she could stop herself. It came out sharp and disbelieving. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." She searched his face for a crack, a tell, anything that would suggest this was some kind of cruel game. There was none, only calm, only certainty. "I don't understand." "You gave me a meal when you didn't have to," he said. "You paid for it with money you needed. You lost your job because of it." She swallowed. "How do you know that?" "Because I was watching," he said gently. "I've been watching this place for years." Her head spun. "Then why let him fire me?" "Because," the man said, voice hardening for the first time, "I needed to know who you were when no one was looking." He reached into his coat and slid a folded document across the table. "I own this diner, quietly, have for a long time. The manager didn't know. Most people don't. It helps me see the truth." Sarah stared at the paper. Her name was on it, along with words she didn't understand: transfer, trust, beneficiary. "I don't want this," she whispered. "You already earned it," he replied, "but that's not why I asked you here." He nodded toward the door. Outside, a black car idled at the curb. "There's something else, something that requires a kind heart and a strong spine. I believe you have both." Her instinct screamed at her to run. Instead, she stood. "Comment justice if you believe she deserved justice." The drive was silent. The city blurred past the window, familiar streets giving way to neighborhoods she'd only ever passed on the bus. They stopped in front of a building that looked more like a bank than anything else. Marble floors, guards at the door. The man handed her a slip of paper with a number on it. "Your key," he said. "It fits box 317. The room was cool and quiet, humming with contained wealth. Sarah's hands shook as she turned the key. Inside the box wasn't money. It was a folder, photographs, ledgers, proof that the diner was only one of many places owned by the man, proof that Dale had been skimming for years, proof that wages had been stolen, tips pocketed, lives quietly squeezed dry. "I kept this," the man said softly, "because I was waiting for someone who would know what to do with it." "You," she said, voice barely steady, "you planned this." "I planned to test my faith in people," he corrected. "You restored it." That afternoon, Dale was escorted out in handcuffs. By evening, the staff had their jobs back along with back pay. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching disbelief turn into relief on faces she knew well. When the man joined her, she didn't look at him. "You could have stepped in sooner," she said. "Yes," he agreed, "and I would have saved you pain." She finally met his eyes. "Then why didn't you?" "Because," he said quietly, "I needed to see if kindness still existed without reward." She nodded once. She understood now. Sarah didn't go home that night, not because she was afraid to be alone, but because everything she thought she understood about her life had tilted sideways. She stayed after the police left, after the staff hugged her with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, after the man, Mr. Holloway, he finally allowed her to call him, disappeared into the black car again with a promise to talk tomorrow. She helped Maria restock napkins. She wiped counters that were already clean. She needed the movement, the familiarity, the reassurance that the world still had edges she could touch. When the last customer left and the lights dimmed, she locked the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing out slowly. The diner felt different now. Lighter, as if something rotten had finally been cut away, but beneath that relief was a new weight, heavier than exhaustion, responsibility, expectation. She had been invisible her whole adult life. Now people were looking at her like she mattered. Her phone buzzed as she stepped into the night, a message from an unknown number. "Tomorrow won't be quiet, be ready." She stared at the screen, then slipped the phone into her pocket and started walking. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to keep moving. The next morning, the noise started early. By the time Sarah reached the diner again, there was a news van parked across the street. A reporter stood under an umbrella, rehearsing lines into a camera. The headline scrolled across a phone someone shoved toward her face. "Local diner manager arrested in wage theft scandal. Employees speak out." Sarah pushed past, heart racing. Inside, the staff clustered together, whispering. Maria grabbed her hand. "They're saying you're the reason," she said, eyes wide, "that you exposed everything." Sarah opened her mouth to correct her, then stopped. In a way, it was true, not because she had uncovered ledgers or called the police, but because she had made a choice. A small one, a bowl of soup, a sandwich, kindness offered without calculation. Mr. Holloway arrived just before noon. This time he didn't sit in the back. He stood at the counter, straight-backed, commanding the room without raising his voice. "I won't keep you long," he said, "but you deserve to hear this from me." The diner fell silent. "I've owned this place for 15 years, he continued. "I let it run without interference because I wanted to know what kind of people profit when no one is watching. Yesterday, I learned enough." His gaze moved to Sarah. "This young woman reminded me what I forgot." He slid a folder onto the counter. "Effective immediately, this diner is employee-owned, shares distributed equally, profits reinvested here, wages transparent, no secrets." Gasps, a sob, someone dropped a mug. Sarah felt dizzy. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, "you earned it by not asking." Later, when the crowd thinned and the reporters packed up, he sat across from her in the same booth as before. "This will bring trouble," he said. "People don't like it when the quiet rules change." She thought of Dale's face as he was led away. "I'm not afraid," she said, surprised to find it was true. He studied her for a long moment. Good, because this was only the first door. He told her then about the others, the restaurants, the properties, the managers who treated people like disposable tools, the accounts that didn't add up. "I've been patient," he said, "but patience can become cowardice if it lasts too long." "You want me to help you," she said. "I want you to decide," he corrected, "because once you start, you don't get to stop halfway." Sarah leaned back, staring at the ceiling, at the flickering light that used to hide men like him in the shadows. She thought of the nights she'd gone to bed hungry so her mother could afford medication. The shifts she'd worked through fevers. The times she'd swallowed insults because rent didn't care about pride. "I'm in," she said. The first target fell faster than anyone expected. A cafe across town, similar complaints, similar numbers that didn't line up, employees who'd learned not to hope. Sarah walked in alone, ordered coffee, watched. She listened more than she spoke. By the end of the week, the owner was under investigation and the staff had a lawyer Mr. Holloway quietly paid for. Word spread. Some called her naive, others called her dangerous. A blogger labeled her the waitress who started a war. Sarah didn't read the comments. She was too busy learning how power really worked, not the loud kind that barked orders, but the silent kind that decided who ate and who didn't. Type yes if you want to see all targets hit at once. The threats began soon after. Anonymous messages, warnings slipped under the diner door, a brick through a window at one of the cafes that had just unionized. Mr. Holloway offered security, lawyers, distance. "No," Sarah said, "if I hide, they win." One night as she locked up, a man stepped out of the alley, tall, well-dressed, smiling without warmth. "You're making powerful people uncomfortable," he said. You should think about stepping back. She met his gaze. You should think about paying your staff. His smile vanished. This ends badly. For you, she replied and walked past him without looking back. At home, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, fear buzzing under her skin, but beneath it was something stronger, purpose. She had spent years reacting to life. Now she was choosing. The next morning, she received a list. Names, businesses, patterns. Mr. Holloway hadn't been idle. This is everything, he said when they met, all at once. Sarah closed the folder slowly. She thought of the man in the back booth, the soup, the key, how easily this could have gone another way if she'd listened to the voice that said it wasn't her problem. Let's do it, she said. Outside, the diner sign flickered to life as the sun rose. For the first time, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a promise. The backlash didn't come all at once. It crept in sideways, disguised as coincidence. A delayed permit here, a surprise inspection there, a supplier suddenly unable to deliver. Sarah noticed the pattern before anyone else did, not because she was especially clever, but because she'd spent years watching systems fail quietly while everyone pretended nothing was wrong. Power didn't always shout. Sometimes it stalled. Sometimes it smiled and said, "Come back tomorrow." She stood in the diner's back office with Maria and two cooks squeezed into the narrow space, paperwork spread across the desk. "This isn't random," Sarah said, tapping a page with the back of a pen. "They're trying to bleed us out slowly." "Who is they?" one of the cooks asked. Sarah exhaled, people who benefited from things staying the way they were. Mr. Holloway joined them moments later, closing the door behind him. He looked tired in a way Sarah hadn't seen before, the weight of years pressing down now that he'd finally stopped ignoring it. "We're getting pushback from the Restaurant Association," he said. Quietly, "they don't like the attention." "So they're afraid," Sarah replied. "Yes," he said, "and that makes them sloppy." The next move came sooner than expected. A formal letter arrived, thick cream paper, heavy with legal language. It accused Sarah and the diner of defamation, of spreading false claims, of coercing employees into statements. It threatened lawsuits, fines, closures. Maria's hands shook as she read it. "We can't fight this," she whispered. Sarah felt the old fear stir, familiar and sharp. The instinct to retreat, to apologize, to survive by shrinking. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Yes, we can," she said, "because we're not lying." She called every employee into the dining room that afternoon. Some stood, some sat on tables. All of them watched her with a mix of hope and worry. "This won't be easy," Sarah said honestly. "People are going to try to scare us, some already are, but nothing changes if we give in now." A dishwasher raised his hand. "What if they shut us down?" Then Sarah said, "We open again, together." The room went quiet. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first, then louder, stronger. Sarah swallowed hard. She hadn't planned a speech. She hadn't planned any of this. But she was learning that leadership wasn't about having answers. It was about refusing to walk away from the questions. That night she stayed late, going through documents, tracing connections. Names repeated, addresses overlapped. A handful of executives sat on multiple boards, owned stakes in dozens of restaurants. Control didn't come from one place. It came from many, all aligned. Mr. Holloway watched her from the doorway. "You're seeing it," he said. "Yes," Sarah replied, "and they're all connected." "They always are," he said. "That's why this matters." The first public hearing was scheduled a week later. Sarah almost didn't go. The thought of sitting under fluorescent lights while lawyers dissected her life made her stomach churn. But she went anyway, wearing a borrowed blazer and the same quiet determination she'd carried into the diner that night with the soup. The room was packed, workers in uniforms, owners in suits, cameras everywhere. When Sarah's name was called, she stood hands steady despite the thud of her heart. She told the truth about wages, about fear, about how easy it was for abuse to hide in plain sight. When she finished, the silence stretched. Then a woman in the back stood up. "It happened to me too," she said. Another voice joined, then another. Stories spilled out, overlapping, messy, undeniable. The narrative shifted in real time. Outside, reporters rushed her. "Do you see yourself as a symbol?" one asked. Sarah shook her head. "No, I see myself as a mirror." The next morning, 3 more businesses were raided, accounts frozen, executives questioned. The pressure cracked something open and information began to pour out. Tips stolen, hours erased, threats made. The truth, once exposed, moved fast. Share this video so communities understand what was hiding. The threats escalated after that. A voicemail filled with static and a single sentence, "Stop now," a note taped to the diner door with no return address. Mr. Holloway insisted on security again. Sarah finally agreed, not because she was afraid for herself, but because she saw the worry in Maria's eyes, in the cooks, in the dishwasher's. Courage didn't mean ignoring danger. It meant acknowledging it and moving forward anyway. One evening, as Sarah walked to her car, someone called her name. She turned to see Dale standing under a streetlight, thinner, angrier, resentment etched into every line of his face. "You ruined my life," he spat. Sarah didn't raise her voice. "You ruined your own," she said. "You think you're better than me," he demanded. "No," she replied, "I think you had a choice just like I did." He laughed bitterly and walked away. Sarah watched him go, feeling neither triumph nor pity, only clarity. This wasn't about villains and heroes, it was about accountability. At home, she finally opened the voicemail from her landlord. The tone had changed, apologetic, willing to negotiate. Funny how that happened when people realized she wasn't powerless anymore. She sat on her bed, keys still resting on her nightstand, and thought about how close she'd come to ignoring that man in the booth. How easily this story could have ended before it began. The idea made her shiver. The next list Mr. Holloway brought was shorter but heavier. "These are the ones who will fight hardest," he said. Sarah looked at the names. She recognized one, a man who owned half the restaurants downtown, a man known for charity galas and smiling photos. "He looks untouchable," she said. "No one is," Mr. Holloway replied. "They just rely on people believing they are." Sarah closed the folder, then let's touch him. Outside, the diner buzzed with life. Laughter, clinking plates. A place that had once swallowed people whole now fed them in every sense of the word. Sarah stood in the doorway for a moment, listening, grounding herself in the sound. She didn't know how this would end, only that she wouldn't look away again. The man who looked untouchable did not appreciate being noticed. Sarah learned that quickly. Within 48 hours of opening the file, strange things began to happen. The diner's website went down after a coordinated wave of fake reviews. A supplier claimed a contract breach that never existed. An anonymous complaint triggered a fire inspection scheduled at the worst possible hour. Each problem alone was survivable. Together, they were designed to exhaust, to make her doubt herself. To make her quit quietly. Sarah recognized the tactic because she'd lived under it before. Exhaustion was the oldest weapon there was. She sat in the back booth late one night, notebook open, pen unmoving, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Mr. Holloway watched her from across the table. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I need to understand it." "Understand what?" "How people convince themselves this is okay." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. "They stop seeing people, they see costs, obstacles, noise, and once you're noise, anything done to you feels justified." Sarah nodded slowly, "Then we need to make them hear us." The hearing was scheduled for the following week. The man, his name was Calder Wynn, arrived with an entourage and a smile polished to perfection. He spoke about job creation, community investment, hard choices. He never once mentioned the missing wages or the threats quietly settled out of court. When Sarah's turn came, she stood and did something unexpected. She said nothing. Instead, she gestured to the back of the room. One by one, people stood. Line cooks, servers, janitors, managers who had finally decided fear was heavier than truth. They spoke plainly, dates, amounts, names, patterns. The room shifted as the story changed shape. This wasn't an accusation anymore. It was a chorus. Calder's smile faltered. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "Do you think this will lead to charges? Are you afraid of retaliation? What's next?" Sarah answered only one, "What's next?" She looked straight into the lens. What's next is accountability. The retaliation came that night. Her phone rang just after midnight, a private number she almost didn't answer. Almost. "You should stop," a man's voice said calmly. "This ends badly for people like you." Sarah sat up, heart racing, but her voice was steady. "People like me." "Yes," he said, "people who forget their place." She smiled despite herself. "I found my place," she replied, "and I'm not leaving." The line went dead. Mr. Holloway insisted on police involvement. Sarah agreed this time, not because she was afraid, but because fear was no longer just hers to manage. It belonged to everyone standing with her. Protecting them mattered more than pride. The next morning, warrants were served, accounts frozen, Calder Wynn's name filled the news cycle, photos surfaced, settlements were reopened. The man who had relied on silence now faced noise he couldn't control. At the diner, the mood was strange, relief tangled with disbelief. Maria hugged Sarah so hard she laughed. "You did this," she said. "No," Sarah replied, "we did." If this shocked you, comment truth below. The trial moved faster than anyone expected. Evidence had been waiting, so had witnesses. Calder took a plea, not because he felt remorse, but because the alternative was worse. The agreement included restitution, public acknowledgement, oversight. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. On the day the verdict was announced, Sarah stood outside the courthouse with Mr. Holloway. "Are you satisfied?" he asked. She considered the question. The city buzzed around them, indifferent and alive. "I don't think this was about satisfaction," she said. "I think it was about stopping." "Stopping what?" "The belief that this is normal." He nodded slowly. "Then what will you do now?" Sarah looked back toward the street, toward the diner, toward the life she hadn't planned but had stepped into anyway. "I'll keep serving," she said, "just not plates." That night she returned to the booth where it had all started. The flickering light had been replaced, the table refinished. A small plaque rested against the wall, simple and unassuming. It didn't name her, it didn't name Mr. Holloway, it read, "Kindness counts." An elderly woman sat there counting coins with trembling fingers. Sarah approached without hesitation. "What can I get you?" she asked. The woman hesitated. "Just water." Sarah smiled. "Soup S on tonight." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" Sarah thought of the key, the folder, the fear, the choice. "Because someone once did the same for me," she said. Later, as she locked up, Mr. Holloway handed her the key again. "I think this belongs to you now," he said. "What does it open?" she asked. "Possibility," he replied. She slipped it into her pocket, feeling its familiar weight. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new resistance, new chances to look away. But tonight she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride, not for the fight she'd won, but for the person she hadn't stopped being along the way. The city didn't crown Sarah a hero. It didn't give her a parade or a neat ending tied with a ribbon. What it gave her was quieter and heavier trust. People began to come to the diner not just to eat, but to talk. Workers from other businesses slipped notes into the tip jar with phone numbers and names. Parents brought their teenagers and told them quietly this is where it started. Sarah listened more than she spoke. She had learned that change didn't begin with speeches. It began with attention. Mr. Holloway stepped back over time, not all at once, not dramatically. One day he simply stopped showing up every morning. Another day he stopped calling with lists. When Sarah finally asked him why, he smiled the same way he had that first night in the booth. "This was never supposed to be mine to finish," he said. "It was supposed to be mine to start." She understood then what the key really meant. It wasn't ownership, it was responsibility. Months passed, the diner thrived. Other restaurants followed the same model, some willingly, some grudgingly. Lawsuits turned into policies, policies turned into habits, habits turned into something like dignity. Sarah still worked shifts when they were short-staffed, she still wiped tables, still refilled coffee. Power hadn't lifted her above the work, it had rooted her more deeply in it. One evening, long after the dinner rush, she sat alone in the booth and thought about the version of herself who had almost walked past an elderly man because she was tired and hurting and afraid. She wondered how many stories ended that way. How many keys rusted unused in pockets because no one stopped. The bell over the door chimed. A young server from a restaurant across town stood there, twisting her apron in her hands. "They said you'd listen," she said softly. Sarah slid out of the booth and smiled. "Sit," she said, "tell me everything. If you want the full truth, hit like so this story reaches more people." Outside, the neon sign buzzed steadily, no longer flickering. The diner glowed against the dark like a small, stubborn promise. Sarah knew the fight wasn't over, it never would be. But she also knew this: kindness was not a weakness that powerful people tolerated, it was a force they underestimated. And that made all the difference. If this story moved you, like this video, comment one word that stood out to you. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story where one choice changes everything.